There's something peculiar that happens to a man who spends a long time alone. Not lonely, mind you, but truly alone, solitary, present with himself in a way most men never experience, away from the noise, the crowds, the constant performance of being someone. And what happens is this: his attraction toward women doesn't disappear, it changes. He still notices beauty. He still feels that ancient pull between male and female. But something in the quality of his desire has shifted. The urgency is gone. The hunger has transformed into something calmer, something more like appreciation than need. Why is this? Why does a man who has been alone for months feel more at ease around women, yet less desperate? Why does he seem to want less while somehow being more present? What exactly happens in solitude that alters the very nature of desire? The answer, I think, is rather simple and rather profound. Most of what we call attraction is not really attraction at all. It's escape. A man seeks women not to move toward them, but to move away from himself, away from silence, away from the uncomfortable encounter with his own consciousness, away from that quiet, persistent tension that lives inside him when there's nothing to distract him from it. And solitude, real solitude, interrupts this pattern entirely. When you're alone long enough, you can no longer run. And when you stop running, something extraordinary happens. You discover that the thing you were running from wasn't really there at all. Let me explain what I mean. The ego, that sense of being a separate, isolated individual, experiences itself as fundamentally incomplete. It feels like something is missing. And this feeling of incompleteness drives most of human behavior. You wake up in the morning, and almost immediately there's a subtle tension, a vague sense that something isn't quite right. You look in the mirror, and the face looking back seems to need something: approval, recognition, proof of its worth. Throughout the day, this feeling follows you. You're in a conversation, but you're not really listening. You're thinking about what to say next to make yourself look good. You're at work, but you're distracted by thoughts of how others perceive you. You're walking down the street, and you catch yourself adjusting your posture when an attractive woman passes by. All of this is the ego at work. And the ego is exhausting, isn't it? Because it's constantly comparing, constantly calculating, constantly trying to shore up its sense of being someone important, someone desirable, someone significant. Now, the ego is very clever. It knows how to disguise its needs. It dresses them up as desire, as passion, as love. But underneath all of that, there's a simple mechanical process happening. The ego is searching for something to make it feel whole. And one of the primary ways the ego seeks completion is through attraction. Think about it. When a man is attracted to a woman, what's really happening? On the surface, yes, there's biological attraction, there's aesthetic appreciation, there's chemistry. All of that is real. But beneath that, there's something else operating. There's a voice, quiet, unconscious, that says, she will make me feel complete. She will validate me. She will prove that I am desirable, valuable, significant. She will fill this strange emptiness I feel inside. The woman becomes, in the ego's imagination, a solution to a problem. The problem of being me. And so attraction becomes not a movement toward another human being, but a movement away from oneself. It becomes a form of psychological relief, like taking a drink to forget, like turning on the radio to avoid silence. The man doesn't want the woman, not really. What he wants is escape from himself. Now, this is a rather uncomfortable thing to recognize. Most men would never admit it, even to themselves. They believe their desire is pure, natural, simple, and in a way it is. But it's also tangled up with this deeper need, this unconscious belief that someone else can complete what feels incomplete inside. I remember once sitting in a cafe, watching a young man at the next table. He was waiting for someone, a woman, clearly, and you could see it in his body, the way he kept checking his watch, the way his knee bounced nervously under the table, the way his face would light up every time the door opened, then fall when it wasn't her. He was not present in that cafe. He was not there at all. He was in a future moment when she would arrive, when he would feel seen, desired, validated. His entire being was leaning forward out of himself into that imagined moment of completion. That's what the ego does with attraction. It makes you absent. It makes you reach. It makes you incomplete until the other person arrives. And the tragedy is this: even when she arrives, even when you have her attention, her affection, her body, the incompleteness doesn't actually go away. It just shifts. It finds a new form. You worry about keeping her, about whether she really loves you, about whether someone else might take her away. The ego is never satisfied because completion cannot be found outside yourself. Now here's where solitude comes in. Solitude is not loneliness. This distinction is crucial. Loneliness is the feeling you get when you resist being alone. It's the ache that comes from believing you should be with someone, that something is wrong with being by yourself. Loneliness is the ego panicking because it has no mirror, no audience, no one to reflect back its image of itself. It's uncomfortable, restless, filled with a kind of anxious reaching toward others. But solitude, real solitude, is something entirely different. It's presence with yourself. It's the dropping of resistance. It's what happens when you stop running from your own company. And when a man enters true solitude, something remarkable begins to happen. First, all the usual distractions fall away. There's no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one watching, no audience for the character you've been playing. In the city, in society, a man is constantly aware of how he appears. He adjusts his posture, his voice, his words to create an impression. Even when he's not consciously doing it, the performance is running in the background. He's always in some subtle way on stage. It's like being an actor who's been playing the same role for so long that he's forgotten there's a person beneath the character. The lines have become automatic, the gestures rehearsed, the personality constructed. But in solitude, the stage disappears. There's no one to see you. And when there's no one to see you, something loosens. The mask begins to slip. And beneath the mask, you discover something unexpected. There's just you. Just this breathing, aware presence. Nothing to prove. Nothing to become. Just this. And in that discovery, the ego begins to quiet down. You see, the ego needs others to exist. It defines itself in relation to people, what they think of you, how you compare to them, whether they approve or disapprove. The ego is a social construct. It's the story you tell about yourself that only makes sense when there's an audience. But alone, truly alone, the ego has no fuel. The story starts to feel less compelling. And gradually, the sense of being a separate, lacking self begins to dissolve. This is not an intellectual process. You can't think your way into it. It happens naturally, organically, when you're simply present with yourself day after day, without distraction, without escape. And as the ego loosens, something remarkable happens to desire. The hunger, that urgent, restless need to be completed by another, begins to fade, not because you've suppressed it, not because you've decided women are bad or relationships are unnecessary, but because the fundamental belief that drove the hunger, the belief that you are incomplete, is no longer as solid as it once was. You begin to realize, in a way that's deeper than words, that you were never incomplete at all. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been carrying a heavy stone in your pocket for years. You've grown so accustomed to its weight that you've forgotten it's there. Your body has adapted to compensate for it. The way you walk, the way you stand, the way you hold yourself. Then one day, quite by accident, the stone falls out, and suddenly everything feels different. Lighter, freer. You can move in ways you couldn't move before. Not because you've gained something, but because you've lost something you never needed in the first place. That's what happens with the ego's need for completion. In solitude, it simply drops away. And when it does, desire transforms. Let me describe the shift more precisely. Before solitude, attraction feels like hunger, like thirst, like something you must have or you'll suffer. There's an urgency to it, a pressure, a kind of low-grade anxiety that drives you to seek, to chase, to acquire. When you see a beautiful woman, the mind immediately starts moving, calculating, fantasizing, building a story. You imagine what it would be like to be with her. You wonder if she noticed you. You feel that familiar tension, part excitement, part fear, part desperate hope. The mind creates an entire narrative in seconds. Maybe she's the one. Maybe she'll understand you in ways no one else has. Maybe with her, you'll finally feel the way you've always wanted to feel. Complete, confident, at peace. And beneath all of that mental activity is a simple belief. If I could have her, I would feel better. I would feel complete. This is the ego's mode of attraction. It's compulsive. It's mechanical. It happens to you rather than arising from you. You've probably noticed this if you've ever been walking down the street and seen someone attractive. For a moment, your attention is completely captured. Your body turns slightly in her direction. Your mind starts spinning stories. And for those few seconds, you're not present at all. You're in a fantasy future where you and she are together, and that fantasy feels more real than the ground beneath your feet. This is not love. This is not even attraction, really. It's the ego grasping for completion. But after solitude, after spending months in your own company, after the ego has loosened its grip, desire changes. It becomes quieter, slower, more selective. You still notice beauty. Of course you do. Beauty is beauty, but the reaction is different. Instead of the mind immediately grasping, building fantasies, calculating strategies, there's just appreciation. Like seeing a sunset. You don't need to possess the sunset. You don't need it to complete you. You simply enjoy its presence while it's there. Women stop being symbols. They stop being objects in the ego's game of completion. They stop being fantasy projections or emotional rescue missions. They become, quite simply, other human beings. And attraction, when it arises from a different place. Not from need, but from resonance. Not from lack, but from fullness. Not from the question, what can you give me? But from the quiet recognition, there you are. This is a profound shift, and it changes everything. When you're attracted from this place, there's no urgency, no desperation, no sense that you must act or you'll lose something precious. You can be with a beautiful woman and simply be with her present, calm, not reaching into the future, not calculating possibilities, not performing, and paradoxically, this is when attraction becomes most real. Because you're not trying to use the other person to fix something inside yourself. You're meeting them as they are, not as your ego imagines them to be. Here's something else that happens after solitude. You stop losing yourself in relationships. Before, when desire was driven by need, there was always this quality of falling. Falling in love, falling into infatuation, falling into fantasy. The metaphor is telling. You lose your footing. You lose your center. You lose yourself. A man in this state will bend himself into whatever shape he thinks she wants. He'll compromise his values, neglect his friends, abandon his interests, anything to keep her, to please her, to ensure she stays and continues to fill that void inside him. I knew a man once who was like this. He was intelligent, creative, had his own life. But the moment he met a woman he was attracted to, he would transform. Suddenly his opinions would shift to match hers. His schedule would reorganize around her availability. His hobbies would fade into the background. It wasn't conscious manipulation. He genuinely believed he was in love. But what was really happening was that he was abandoning himself in hopes that she would provide what he couldn't provide for himself. A sense of being whole. And inevitably she would sense this. Women have a remarkable intuition for when a man is using them to escape himself. They can feel the desperation beneath the romantic gestures, the neediness beneath the declarations of love. And eventually she would leave. And he would be devastated, not because he lost her, really, but because he lost the temporary relief she provided from having to face himself. This pattern repeats itself over and over in relationships. Two people, each incomplete, each hoping the other will fill their emptiness. And for a while, it seems to work. The romance, the intensity, the feeling of finally being understood, it's intoxicating. But it can't last, because you can't use another person to escape yourself indefinitely. Eventually, the incompleteness resurfaces, and then comes disappointment, resentment, blame. He becomes dependent. And dependency breeds all kinds of distortions: possessiveness, jealousy, control, fear. But after solitude, something has shifted. You've spent months being complete unto yourself. You've discovered that you don't actually need another person to feel whole. And this changes the entire dynamic of relationship. You don't chase anymore, not because you're playing games or following some strategy, but because there's nothing to chase. You're already here, already complete. If a connection happens, wonderful. If it doesn't, also wonderful. There's no fear of loss because you haven't lost yourself in the first place. Let me put it this way. Imagine a man standing firmly on his own ground, at ease, present. A woman walks by, he notices her, he feels attraction, but he doesn't lean toward her. He doesn't leave his ground. He remains exactly where he is, centered, calm, open. If she's drawn to him, if there's genuine resonance, she'll come closer. And when she does, he'll meet her, not from need, not from desperation, but from presence. And if she doesn't come closer, he remains exactly where he is, complete, whole, undisturbed. This is not coldness, it's not indifference, it's groundedness. It's the ability to be with attraction without being controlled by it. And women sense this. They sense when a man is grasping, when he needs something from them, when he's using the relationship to escape himself. And they sense when a man is present, when he's offering rather than demanding, when he's meeting rather than consuming. The quality of connection that becomes possible from this place is entirely different. It's mature, it's honest, it's free. Now here's the beautiful paradox in all of this. You would think that spending long periods alone would make a man less capable of connection, less interested in intimacy, colder somehow. But the opposite is true. When you're comfortable with solitude, when you're at peace with your own company, you become more capable of genuine connection. Because you're no longer using the other person. You're no longer projecting your fantasies onto them. You're no longer demanding that they complete you. You're simply there, present, open, and from that presence, real intimacy becomes possible. I've watched this happen with men who've spent time in monasteries, in wilderness retreats, in long journeys alone. They come back different, quieter, less hungry, but also more available, more real. They don't talk as much, but when they speak, there's substance. They don't chase attention, but they give attention beautifully when they're with someone. They don't perform love, but they love more deeply because the ego's agenda has loosened. There's a certain quality to their presence that's hard to describe. It's like they've stopped broadcasting and started receiving. They're not trying to make an impression, they're simply observing what's actually happening between themselves and the other person. And in that observation, something authentic can emerge. Not the scripted interaction the ego creates, but genuine meeting. There's an old saying in some traditions, you must learn to be alone before you can be with another. And it's true. Not because being alone teaches you some technique or strategy for relationships, but because it teaches you that you are already complete. And from that completeness, you don't enter relationships to take, you enter them to share. The man who has spent time in solitude no longer asks, what can you do for me? He asks, what is real here between us? And that question changes everything. There's something else I want to mention about this transformation. When desire is driven by the ego's need for completion, it carries enormous pressure. The man feels he must succeed. He must win her over. He must prove himself. The whole thing becomes heavy, loaded with significance. Every interaction is a test. Every silence is interpreted. Every gesture analyzed. Because so much is riding on the outcome. His sense of worth, his identity, his proof that he is desirable, all of it hinges on whether she responds positively. This makes attraction exhausting. It makes it serious. It makes it work. But after solitude, when the ego has loosened, attraction becomes lighter. It becomes play. You are no longer trying to prove anything. You are no longer carrying the weight of needing her approval to feel okay about yourself. So the interaction becomes natural, spontaneous, free. You can laugh, you can be silly, you can be honest, you can let silences be silences without rushing to fill them. You can let the moment be whatever it is without trying to force it into something else. This is when attraction is most enjoyable, for both people, because neither person is using the other. Both are simply present, exploring, seeing what emerges. And paradoxically, this is when attraction is most magnetic. A man who is at ease with himself, who isn't grasping or performing or proving, carries a certain presence that is naturally appealing. Not because he's trying to be appealing, but because he's real. Women are drawn to this, not to the performance of confidence, but to genuine groundedness, not to the display of value, but to authentic presence. And the man discovers something wonderful. When you stop trying to attract, you become attractive. Let me bring this to a close with one final observation. The deepest shift that happens after solitude is this. You learn to meet another person without losing yourself in the process. Before, relationships were about merging, about becoming we, about defining yourself in relation to the other person. Your identity became tangled up with theirs. Your mood depended on their mood. Your sense of worth depended on their approval. This creates all kinds of problems, because when two people lose themselves in each other, they stop being two individuals in relationship. They become one confused, codependent entity, each blaming the other when something feels wrong. But after solitude, you know what it's like to be yourself, fully, completely, and you don't want to give that up. So when you enter relationship, you enter it differently. You don't merge, you meet. You remain here on your ground. She remains there on hers. And between you, there's a space, a sacred space, where connection happens without either person disappearing. You can love her without needing her. You can desire her without demanding her. You can be with her without losing your center. And this, I think, is what mature relationship looks like. Not two halves trying to make a whole, but two wholes sharing their completeness. The man who has spent time in solitude knows this in his bones. He's tasted his own completeness. He's learned that he doesn't need another person to feel whole. And from that knowing, he can offer relationship its greatest gift: presence without pressure, love without loss. So to return to where we began, why does solitude change a man's attraction toward women? The answer is simple: it doesn't. Solitude doesn't change attraction. Attraction remains biological, natural, alive. What changes is the man himself. He is no longer running from himself. So he no longer needs women as escape. He is no longer seeking completion. So he no longer uses relationships to fill a void. He is no longer driven by the ego's hunger. So he no longer approaches women with urgency and desperation. Instead, he meets them calmly, honestly, from presence rather than need. And in that meeting, something real becomes possible. Not the fantasy the ego constructs, not the idealized image of relationship, but the genuine encounter between two human beings, both complete, both present, both free. When you no longer need another person to escape yourself, you are finally free to love without losing yourself. And that freedom, that groundedness, that's what solitude offers. Not the absence of desire, but the transformation of it. Not the elimination of attraction, but the deepening of it into something real. A man who has spent time alone returns to the world of relationship changed, not cold, not distant, not above it all, but present, grounded, whole. And from that wholeness, he can finally meet another person, not as a solution to his emptiness, but as another expression of life itself. This is the gift of solitude. Not that it removes the pull between male and female, but that it removes the compulsion behind the pull. What remains is pure, simple, true, and that, I think, is worth discovering.